Well, good afternoon or morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Developing the Passport Learning Outcomes and Proficiency Criteria for Written Communication. I'm Kate Springsteen, Project Coordinator of Member and Education Services for Interstate Passport. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available at www.wichi.edu/passport/webinars by tomorrow, March 30th. If you have questions throughout the webinar, type your question into the box on the GoToWebinar panel and it will be brought to the presenter's attention. Following the webinar, I will be sending out an email with information on where to find the recording, as well as a link to a survey which we would very much appreciate if you would fill out. I'm delighted to introduce you to our presenters for today's webinar, Teresa Tande and James Goodman. Teresa is an Associate Professor of English, Humanities, and Communication at Lake Region State College. She is involved with the State General Education Council, having just served as its president. In addition to several language arts-related state initiatives, Teresa is also involved with the state's college retention, diversity, and accreditation committees. Teresa received her BS in Music and English and her Master's in Education and her National Board Certification in Language Arts. James has served at Leeward Community College in Pearl City, Hawaii as Dean of Arts and Sciences since 2005. He has chaired his campus's Developmental Education Committee and has worked with his faculty to develop a number of programs, including the AS and Natural Sciences. He chaired the Passport Learning Outcomes team for written communication in 2012 and later was involved in recruiting faculty for Phase 2. Prior to this, he was an associate professor in art and served as faculty senate chair. James earned his BFA and MFA at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Welcome, Teresa and James.
Thanks, Kate, and hi there, James. How you doing today?
Good, thanks, Kate.
Okay, so it's been interesting preparing for this. James and I have had to go back and recall things from 4 years ago, and in doing that, a couple of things happened. Number one, it solidified even more my knowledge of the passport and the importance of it. And it also reminded me of just how much fun we had as we were on these telephone conversations, sharing our ideas about what makes good marks of written communication. So we're excited to share what we discovered during that process with you today. We want to share it in 3 parts. The first part, some of you probably already know, but just to get everybody up to speed, is we'll go through again what is the Interstate Passport, what are the fine parts of it, what is its purpose, and then we'll go into the actual process that we went through to develop the PLOs and the PC for written communication. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about why a person would become, or a school would become a member of the Interstate Passport Network. And of course, interspersed will be questions and answers. So the first part is, what is it? I think of the times I've had students, 1 or 2, 3 of them, does it matter how many? 1 is too many. They come back to me and say, they wouldn't accept my English 120 class in such and such a college because it didn't have this name in the title, or the number was a little bit off. It was like, my gosh, what more can they expect from a Comp 2 class than what we went through? And it's frustrating to find out that a student would have to spend more time and more money taking a class that essentially they had already taken. And so the overall purpose of the Interstate Passport is to reduce that unnecessary repetition of academic work once the students transfer. And it becomes a matter of agreeing on what the important things are. I think it's very crucial to remember that this isn't an initiative that came down from the top and trickled down to the classroom and the students. It's actually a grassroots initiative that was started by academic leaders. The focus is on the lower division general education. You'll see it throughout as the LDGE. And it works on a block system. There are 9 blocks. Each of them have certain outcomes that need to be a part of it. And those were developed by a group of teachers, such as James and I and a few others from other states, coming together and comparing what our states, what our institutions deem as important, and coming up with a set that we all agreed were important. And it's also nice to know that at different parts of this process, we have registrars and the institutional leaders of researchers for each institution also putting in and looking at how all of this pulls together. So there are 9 areas, and if you're familiar with LEAP from the American Association of Colleges and Universities, these will not be foreign to you. The first 3 we started with are the foundational skills, and so I was lucky to be in on one of the very first ones. The idea is that oral communication and written communication and quantitative literacy are used in every class in some capacity. And then there are the knowledge of concepts, natural sciences, the human cultures, human society, creative expression, the more traditional classes that come from lower division general education. And then finally there are the cross-cutting skills, and they're the skills that we know are in classes, but until recently haven't set them aside as something to be held accountable for. There's more of the assumption, well, of course people know how to go about critical thinking, and of course people know how to do good teamwork, but we haven't thought on the other end of it, what does critical thinking look like? What does good teamwork look like? The interstate passport process then is in several different areas. First off is the selection of the passport areas, and again a lot of that was done by staff, and again they use the LEAP as the model, and what they call ELOs we now call the PLOs, the Passport Learning Outcomes. Those are designed by faculty, as are the proficiency criteria that measure how well a person has met those outcomes. So those are the 2 big terms that need to understand. What makes it possible for a college in Hawaii to accept a student from North Dakota knowing they have the prerequisite knowledge and skills to do well in their classes? And so this is what James and I were involved in, and we negotiate back and forth, and we come up with what are known as the passport learning outcomes, those common characteristics that the teachers in that different area say, yes, these are important. And I have to say, and James certainly pitch in with you too, I was a little bit nervous because I thought, what does this 2-year college instructor from a little college in North Dakota really know about teaching writing? You know, I'm not surrounded by it all the time. We're pretty isolated out here. And yet from our very first meeting that went very smoothly, and I'll just put a side note in here, James was our leader. But from that very first meeting, it was such an eye-opener for me to see it doesn't matter if we're separated by states or thousands of miles. We, by virtue of being in the area we are, recognize what makes good writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so, yeah, and so it's, and I'm sure you found this with yours too, is that there was nothing that we came up with that was contrary to anything from our institution.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's an important part of this, that your outcomes from the passport can't go against anything that would be in your own institution. You need to have them compatible. So we agreed on the learning outcomes, and then our next job was to agree on how do we measure that? How do we know if they're proficient in those areas? And so we simply came up with representative examples of assignments that might measure it. And again, both the PLOs and the PC are for all 9 areas. And James is going to explain a little more detail the process that we went through to come up with our PLOs and PC.
Thank you, Teresa. In this part, we'll look at how the passport learning outcomes and the proficiency criteria were developed for written communication. Once our, this is kind of the timeline of how we developed all these things. And once my campus was contacted by the state facilitator, we were sent a spreadsheet to first list our Gen Ed core and then to focus on the 3 areas to align. In the first phase, it was written communication, oral communication, and quantitative literacy. With our partner institution, UH West Oahu, we aligned our learning outcomes on courses that best match the outcomes of those areas. For writing, we listed a number of writing courses, but we kind of focused on a basic composition course that was one of the most portable classes, one that was closest to the other campuses' Gen Ed core English composition classes. Then we submitted the learning outcomes from our state for each of those areas. Those were compiled by WICHE with outcomes from other pilot states. It was with this crosswalk that we met with other state reps in Boulder in 2012. When the state teams met in Boulder, each of our state's teams sat on different areas. As there were only 4 of us from our state, I thought I'd fit best with the written communication group. Having worked for years with my campus's developmental education committee and attending a number of conferences on that subject, I felt fairly comfortable in the discussion, though I realized that as written communication was not my subject area, I was going to have to check in a lot with the chair of the language arts on my campus. And thanks to Apple iPhone and texting, I was able to provide answers to some pretty specific questions and concerns during that meeting. When we all returned from Boulder, a number of us were contacted by WICHE and set up into PLO and PC development teams. I was asked to be the chair of the written communication criteria and assessment team, in which he sent out the schedule and arranged for the conference calls. Each state had a representative that participated in these discussions. Teresa, how were you contacted about this?
I was at our Gen Ed conference, our fall conference, and 2 of our leaders had just returned from the WICHE meeting in Boulder. And we were trying to pick out representatives for those 3 key areas, and one of our state coordinators asked me to represent the written communication team, and I gladly accepted.
All right. Once the matrix for written communication was sent out to each state with instructions to, quote, make suggestions on that document for substantive changes to the features or outcomes, as well as suggestions for evidence of mastery, unquote, my role was to collect all the comments and create a new document for the discussion on our next conference call. As I was the only state rep for written communication, I was also responsible for running all of these drafts by our campus's English discipline coordinator and keeping our faculty senate chair updated on the progress of the passport.
My job was a little bit easier because there was only one other English teacher, and so I'd run it through that other English teacher. And in fact, even our what we call our English group statewide there's just 6 or 7 of us who faithfully attend. So a little bit easier, but again, a thread of commonality.
Mm-hmm. By the end of the process, the passport learning outcome features and the passport learning outcomes were established. The PLOs were initially drawn from the common set of learning outcomes agreed upon by the pilot states representatives at the October 2012 passport negotiation meeting, then later refined during the process. And here's a closer look.
All right, so these are the things that we came up with, and it wasn't that it was all boom, boom, boom. We used another source, the WPA, the Writing Program Administrators. They had set up things like this, so there was a lot of agreement. I think about the only discussion we had is a little bit of wordsmithing, which is to be expected with English people, but mainly shifting of where we thought something would fit better. Is that how you remember it, James?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
I mean, it was pretty much an agreement from the get-go.
Yeah, in fact, at that original Boulder meeting, somebody, and of course, these are people who are all excellent in their field. They came up right away with the that was called the WPA.
PA, yeah.
Yeah, WPA, and that established really the principles of what we're looking at now.
And one other thing you'll see is there is some repetition because we thought things belonged in both places.
Mm-hmm. So when we look at each of these, we start off with rhetorical knowledge. Demonstrate rhetorical knowledge, address issues of audience, purpose, genre, syntax, and grammar appropriate to that task.
And our phrase appropriate to the task is one that we came up with to help us distinguish, well, you know, if you're doing this kind of writing, one thing is expected. When you're doing this kind of writing, another thing is expected. So we've used that a few times to make sure people realize it's not a cookie cutter solution.
Okay. Inquiring communication. Use writing and reading for inquiry, learning, thinking, and communicating.
I think right here is where we see that this is one of the foundational blocks, written communication, because writing certainly is one of the better ways to find out what has a student really learned, if they can put it into writing in some form. I know I use it a lot, not just in my English classes, but I used to teach an education class, and it was the same thing. You know, the writing would tell me.
Use of sources. Evaluate, use, and ethically synthesize sources in support of a claim following an appropriate documentation system.
Oh, I remember this discussion, not so much about how we had it, but the need to have it. Because those of us who are older, you know, we've seen the use of computers and what students can find on there and how much they believe it and how easy it is to cut and paste. You know, how do we get them to look at the ethical use of that information? How do we get them to make sure they know to document it? Because not all of them really care. Well, I put something at the end, isn't that good enough? Well, no, because we need to be able to tell within the text what is the stuff that you're borrowing.
Writing process knowledge. Develop flexible strategies for generating, revising, editing, and proofreading.
Again, this one is a little bit more English related, composition related, although we would hope in other subject areas that teachers encourage their students, if they're going to write a report, write it, reflect on it, see how they can change it, make it better.
Yeah. Conventions and mechanics. Demonstrate mastery of conventions, including spelling, grammar, mechanics, and documentation style appropriate to the writing task.
All right, so I have just a little something to say about this one. I have had so many people throughout my multi-decade career say, well, why should I do that? I'm not the English teacher. I'm going, what? You have a college degree. You have a master's degree. Certainly by the time you've done that, you recognize basic good use of those kinds of things. And then they agree, well, yeah, maybe. Well, if you don't, it's time you better start paying attention. You know, it's not that hard to be able to tell a student, you really should use a capital letter here because it is the name of a country, or at the very least, hold students responsible for the terminology and correct display of words from your subject area.
Self-assessment and reflection. Be able to reflect on one's inquiry and composing processes in order to critique and improve one's own and others' work.
And again, this was a key point we all felt was important. One of the, I can't really say newer because it's been around for quite a few decades, and that is one of the newer concepts is students need to be able to look at other samples of writing and understand whether or not that writing is meeting the requirements for an assignment, and to have ideas of how a student can improve. If a student doesn't have a thesis forecasting statement in a paper, a student reading it should be able to recognize that, because they should know the importance of having a thesis forecasting statement. So it's not a matter of asking them to know something they haven't been taught. It's a matter of reflecting on those skills they have been taught and how they're using them. So are we ready for any questions where we can provide the answers?
Well, thanks, James and Teresa. You guys are doing an excellent job. I have a question, and it's were there any concerns or complaints by faculty once they saw the written communication PLOs and PC?
Well, for myself, when I got back from the Boulder meeting, I had been involving the English faculty fairly well, because I needed to get their, get information from them. But the math faculty I hadn't consulted with at all. But remember now, that's way before all of these things were put together. So the math faculty are going, how come you didn't tell us about this? Because, well, we just found out about this ourselves. But once they got a chance to look at this and become involved with it, they were very much in favor with it. In fact, although I had expressed in the very beginning, this is really nothing. This is really, we're not, this process is not telling you how to teach your classes or what to teach. What this is we are finding commonalities among your learning outcomes and learning outcomes across these partner institutions. And so very much like a standard MOA, all this is coming to an agreement and understanding. So once they understood that, they thought it was great. In fact, even though he didn't really have to, he saw what one of our lead math faculty, he was actually in the process of updating the curriculum for one of our courses, and he saw what was needed in there. He goes, yeah, I was thinking about doing that. So he actually did create a new segment in there so that it would fully align with the learning outcomes for the math. But other than that, the oral communication, written communication, everybody thought this was a fantastic clarification of what we all do.
Our experience was a little bit different, and maybe it's because of where we were at the time we started this process. We were just beginning our second cycle of HLC. We had just gotten a new president, and within our North Dakota Gen Ed, we were looking at taking this same concept from Passport and making it compatible to our new general eds. And so there were a lot of things coming to people. And so I spent probably 2 years trying to get people to understand that we were working through a process. It wasn't already developed. We were working through a process to find those commonalities. So there would be that trust factor that when I send my students to Hawaii, I've said they can do these things because they've completed X, Y, and Z, and then I can expect them to know these things because they come from X, Y, and Z, instead of saying, oh yeah, that's right, you're from, and they don't do it that way there, that sort of thing. The other difficulty that actually persisted as we brought this out statewide and looked at hooking into what was happening in the high schools is people confusing the outcomes for written communication with the outcomes for a particular class.
Yeah.
And you know, a composition class will have its own outcomes, all of which can point back to one of these in written communications. But these are outcomes saying that by the time you've completed your lower division gen ed, these are things that you should have learned, and they're general. You know, they're not specific necessarily to any one class, even though there might be one or two classes that specifically teach them. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So that was my experience. And I will tell you this, as we got involved, because we were lucky, we were one of the first ones who signed on in the state, and I am proud to say we are the only ones who have remained throughout the process. We've had people come in and out and in and out, and we have stayed true with it. And so we've had the opportunity, as the other 6 blocks were developed, to have more and more of our faculty involved. And once they sat through the process themselves, they went, oh, that's how it, now I get it. This is really a great thing.
Yeah, I found that one of the most kind of exciting and rewarding parts was seeing how well the faculty got together. I mean, I kind of, maybe I've been doing this too long, but I always expected the worst. But in person, people just realize that whether you're from a mountain state or plain state or even Hawaii, we all tend to teach English the same way. We all have the same goals, and often, you know, when they met in person, and even I think the great conversations we had as we worked through these things, everybody was, you know, it was really exciting to see so many faculty from so many different areas all find common ground on these issues.
Yeah, definitely. I know, so it's ironic, I worked in one of the first areas, and one of the very last blocks to develop was the teamwork and values. And I was fortunate to serve on that team also. And when we met in Boulder, we had a slightly larger group than what you and I worked with, but it was amazing. We had Phi-Ed people, we had business people, we had sociology teachers, English teachers. We had a little bit of everyone, and it was the same thing. There are just those common expectations. It's a matter of how, you know, how we arrive at them and at what level was all that we had to negotiate.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you, guys. I don't have any other questions at this point. But again, if anybody does have a question, just please type that into the box on the GoToWebinar panel, and we will have another section at the end of this presentation where we can your questions can be brought to James and Teresa's attention.
All right.
Okay. Well, on the development of proficiency criteria, we looked at the purpose and the process. For purpose, show how students might demonstrate proficiency. Give greater detail of expectations. Show how ongoing assignments might be used. As for process, each state rep was assigned an area. So with this crosswalk, team members were invited to suggest revisions to the passport learning outcomes. Then we looked to establish transfer level criteria for each outcome. Each team member was assigned an area to develop possible ways to determine proficiency. During the conference call, yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, just because you don't see James's name nor mine on there, we had our assignments too on later pages.
Right. And so each team member was assigned an area to develop possible ways to determine proficiency. During the conference calls, the group would discuss and agree upon criteria and the wording. So in a nutshell, our process for the development of proficiency criteria came down to assigning each team member an area to determine proficiency. Then I collected those responses and shared them with the team. Our team discussion evaluated each suggested criteria on whether the proficiency criteria was reflective of the passport learning outcomes. Then we came to a consensus. Once compiled, each of the team members ran it by their peers for comment and approval.
I want to just make a comment on the process. Out of everything we went through, this was the process that I think we asked the most questions about and had the most discussion about to come to an understanding of exactly what the purpose was of the proficiency criteria. I think, at least for myself, initially it was, what, you do all of these assignments to prove it? That's crazy. Or even to say you just do one of them, well, that won't measure this, that, or the other thing. And this is where it goes back to the autonomy of the institutions and using the best judgment possible. These are just suggestions. You might have something better. Go for it. The big deal is, in the end, you have actual materials that show a student is proficient in the outcomes.
The final result of that work is here. This page and the next 3 slides are listed. The Passport Learning Outcome features on the left-hand side. The Passport Learning Outcomes next to that, and the transfer level proficiency criteria in the last column.
And this shows you where this isn't just for English classes. If you look down, 3 of them, a narrative of historical events and or fictional events using chronological organization. In order to do that, a person needs to have some rhetorical knowledge for format, for who are they explaining this to, at what level. And so each of those possible assignments can fit with just about any area. I think here I looked at, here's a very, very general one. Presentation of ideas and words of the authors in context, used fairly without distortion. That's not just an author like a short story or a novel. That could be an author of a scientific theory. That could be an author of a historical perspective. You know, again, it's just good, solid writing.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that I think the faculty appreciated, and I very much did, was that our agreed upon transfer level proficiency criteria was specific enough to establish clear expectations for courses that would qualify as fulfilling their requirements, yet broad enough for each college to meet those expectations with their courses in their own way.
Yeah, I agree. And then
So
just a few more.
Criteria on the right-hand side. And are these the ones that's going to be available, Kate? Are these the slides that are going to be available?
Yeah, this matrix of the Passport Learning Outcome feature, the actual Passport Learning Outcomes, and the proficiency criteria is available right now in the handouts if anyone would like to view that in its entirety.
Okay.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one. And of course, there's no limit to what can go under that criteria column, but those are enough to let people think, improve upon, or try what is written there.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have any questions at this point about the criteria? Or we'll take any question, but anything specific about the criteria?
There aren't any questions right now, so we can move forward, and there's one more slide, I think, with questions at the end that we can, any questions that come about, we can take at that point.
Okay, and as we continue with this, Kate, too, if you would even think, you've done a few of these, and if there are some generic questions that seem to keep coming up, if you wouldn't mind raising them, just because the people who aren't here now and might listen to this later might be one of the questions that they have.
Sure.
So the last part is joining. Why would a school institution become a member? Why wouldn't they? If they can have a student from their institution transfer seamlessly to another college, that's just good for everybody. It takes back a lot of that, I don't know, you can't call it nitpicking, I guess would be the word, like, oh no, we need a copy of your syllabus. We need some sample assignments, that sort of thing. It's like, where's the trust factor here? And the key thing that makes the interstate passport so good is that trust factor is built in there by the fact that faculty from all over have come up with the PLOs and the PC.
Can I
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, go on. I just want to pop in before we move on to the next subject. But finish your sentence, please. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, not only will they be able to transfer more smoothly, but then it's more likely that they're going to complete.
Yeah.
One thing.
Okay, apparently not. Okay, I didn't. I just want to mention the part about facilitate transfer, because that was really the initial impetus to this program to begin with, is that, you know, I don't think people realize how many times students actually do go not only within their state but outside of the state, and that also goes for our military students.
Yes.
And I didn't realize quite that many militaries, spouses, children, when they move from state to state about every 2 years, they carry credits with them, and I didn't really realize the impact till we were approached by one of those for-profit colleges and wanted to establish an MOA with us, and we thought, well, not really. Why? And they go, well, we've already got a couple hundred of your students. And we're, really? And what happens is, once they move on, they've got to complete it somewhere. Sometimes there's an institution, sometimes there's not. But I think that as we continue the marketing awareness of Passport, why not our public higher educational institutions meet the needs of these military students?
And that fits in with adapts to higher education's changing landscape. We know that college students aren't the same that they were in our time. It's not a matter of, I'm going to college, I go there for 4 years, and I get my degree. That isn't the case at all. Students are moving. They're much more transient than they ever were before. They might start at one college, transfer for a semester or two, and not just the military families, but for other reasons, take another semester or two, and then transfer to yet a third place. And you just think of the time that they lose. Now in North Dakota, we have a different situation. We do have what we call the Gerda agreement. And so there, the idea is, if you have completed your 60 LDG or 39 LDG at any institution in North Dakota within the university system, your LDGE will not be questioned at the receiving. But the trick is you have to do all 39. Once you start separating that, then it becomes open to pick and choose.
Right.
You know, and so then it becomes more like moving from, you know, like I said, that one student who left North Dakota and went to a neighbor, or not a neighboring, 2 states away, and was told that her writing class wouldn't count, even though she had received the college's writing award for that year. You know, that kind of crazy thing. So it's good news for everybody. We had talked about the quality assurance, and this was another area where our faculty first got hung up, because again, this is a work in progress, and we didn't have this information at the beginning, because our big thing was, so what if they take this class and they get a D, they haven't failed the class, but we don't consider it having been meeting the conditions of that class. And so one of the passport quality assurance aspects is they must have a minimum grade of a C, which is a good deal. And then there's tracking of student progress, which is nice, because I think each semester the plan is to do that, and then the receiving institution sends information to the sending institution, and the sending institution can look at that data and say, oh my gosh, what is happening in the science arena or the written arena or whatever it is, and then we can finally have some feedback to see how our students are doing in areas in which we might need to improve. You're at a 2-year too, aren't you, James? Or are you at a 4-year?
Yeah. We're a 2-year college, and actually we're part of a 10-system campus, 1 president, 1 board of regents, and there's out of that there's 3 of them that are 4-year universities, and there's 7 2-year community colleges. And I mean, when you talk about the quality assurance, it kind of reminds me of, you know, the old Cold War adage of trust but verify, and that's part of this too, because I remember that we used to have articulation issues with our main 4-year university, where they wouldn't accept some of our courses or require them to take them over again. And one time we were in conversation, because I used to be faculty senate chair, and they said, well, don't take it personally. It's not that they don't trust you, because, you know, we pointed out that a lot of us were TAs for your classes, so we know what the expectations were. And they said, well, don't take it personally. It's not that they don't trust you. They don't even trust each other, you know, within their own department. So, you know, this process really does establish some very firm verification process, and I think you're going to get to that in a minute.
Yeah, and I look at it as a very positive aspect for community colleges in particular, because there, in a lot of places, there is that, you know, that trust factor as to, are you using the right kind of textbook or whatever the case might be. So there is the quality assurance, and then there's a board, a passport board that reviews it. I don't know a whole lot about that. Do you know anything about that, Kate, how that will work?
Yeah, so the Passport Review Board is comprised of the Passport State Facilitators. Real quickly, the Passport State Facilitators are the folks who coordinate all the in-state activities of each state which has institutions involved in interstate passport.
Okay. And then,
sorry,
I was just going to say, does that tie in also to number 4? The evaluation research study?
Well, a little bit. So Rutgers University School of Management is running the evaluation research study, and they talk with the Passport State Facilitators pretty frequently. But the evaluation research study is an independent study. Okay.
But then again, it shows that you don't just do this and there it is.
Right.
You know, it's constantly looking at reflecting and improving, reflecting and improving, which again to me makes me very comfortable to be a part of it.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about this pilot mapping.
Yeah, the mapping pilot project is the last quality assessment piece, and there's faculty at 6 institutions in 3 states, Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, who are rating how well assignments and then corresponding student artifacts meet the learning outcomes that were developed by the faculty in the other states, and they're using rubrics that were developed by the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, NCHEMS, and that pilot is finishing up at the end of May of this year.
So there'll be more data coming from that.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't visited the Witchy website, it is well worth anybody's time, but it's certainly the place to go to if you just want to check into this a little bit more, if you want to double check a few things. There's all kinds of resources. It's very clear who the contact people are, and now that you've been a part of this webinar, you have Kate's name, so you can always contact her and she'll certainly direct you to the right person if it isn't her. I know in preparation for this, I've gone to the Witchy website quite a few times. I used to just do it, limited for written communication and teamwork, but I've gone to it quite a few times, and may I say the passport is just a part of the many things that you do for education, which is exciting. So are there any questions now to wrap up, or maybe, James, even if there's any additional comments you think that should be put in?
I do have a question. Is it necessary to use writing courses as part of the passport block for written communication? And if not, do I need to demonstrate how in my syllabus what I require my students to do aligns with the passport learning outcomes of written communication?
Let me address that one first, and then perhaps Teresa can add on to that. Remember that this does reflect the Gen Ed core, and so as the Gen Ed core, foundation of all of them is basically a composition or two composition classes, English composition. So in this case, written communication would, at least what we aligned, as I recall, all of that were composition classes. To give you an example, when you have these learning outcomes, we in Hawaii, we have within the Gen Ed core, we had only required one course, and almost all the other colleges required two courses in composition. But because what makes this kind of a revolutionary idea is it's based on the learning outcomes, not on the number of credits or seat time. The credit hours or seat time. So if you're able to accomplish that in one semester versus 2 semesters, then you qualify as meeting that outcome. I would say, though, that if you're teaching a content-based class, let's say you're teaching a sociology class, you have a lot of writing there, and you might correct me on this, I think it qualifies at other levels for the passport, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily written communication, because that's not the primary focus of that class. But I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I would think somebody would want to talk to their English composition teacher before looking at something else. There are certain key things, and I think in particular the work involved in teaching proper documentation. It's not just a matter of knowing where to put the comma and the period. It's a matter of knowing how to correctly paraphrase, how to correctly summarize. And that isn't done easily. And so a person who is in a content area can certainly give writing assignments, but the focus of their instruction will not be on how to improve that writing. It's more a matter of, this is what I expect you to do, now go and do it. Although we had also talked too, well, one thing that we did in picking out our blocks is we had each teacher verify, as they looked at the outcomes for the 9 areas, verify, yes, this class can fulfill all of those. This class can fulfill all of those. This class can fulfill all of those. That was the approach that we took. Others, I don't know, do they have the possibility of saying this class and this class together might fulfill all of them? Do any of the colleges do that? Kate, do you know?
I'm not sure what each college's process is, but I think that what you're saying, Teresa, speaks to the institutional autonomy of Interstate Passport again. I don't, we wouldn't ever say that this course is not going to meet the learning outcomes. That's not our role.
Right.
We trust that the faculty and that each institution is going to do a process or something similar to what your school did, Teresa, and that we trust that they will be able to determine whether the courses in any section or any area of the passport block will meet the learning outcomes for that area.
And that's the other thing too. You know, it's not necessarily that you say this one class and you have everything taken care of,
Mm-hmm.
because then a person would only need to take 9 classes to have the block taken care of, and that's not the concept behind this. It is still the skills needed for general education.
Right.
So we're pretty comfortable with what we came up with. There were other things that we had looked at, but for now we wanted to make sure that the most, I don't want to say the most basic, but we wanted that assurance that if they end up transferring, we know they have those skills. And we wanted to make it such that it isn't done in just one, but it also isn't done over 4 classes, and so they might start and then they have to move again, and then they wouldn't get their stamp. So there's a lot of things to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that if you're going through the process of constructing your passport block, just looking at the name of the area, written communication, and you're probably most likely to go to a writing class right away to see if that
Right.
course or courses in there would enable a student to meet those learning outcomes.
And it might mean that some of those classes will have to tweak what their original course outcomes were. For example, we have a class that doesn't necessarily teach documentation. Well, that's going to have to be worked in there if it wants to be a part of the passport block.
Right. And to add on that real quickly, Teresa, I want to reiterate that, the Interstate Passport is not meant to change an institution's curriculum or learning outcomes in any way. But if an institution wants to become a member of the Passport network, and if a course is in a passport block, then the institution has to certify that, yes, our learning outcomes are congruent with and not in conflict with the learning outcomes of Interstate Passport.
And I have to say, we just went through our block assignment this fall, and it was like a professional development. It was a great exercise to really become more familiar with more than just our own area in Gen Ed.
Yeah.
It was very positive.
Yeah, Teresa, I don't have any other questions right now, but I wonder if you want to talk just a little bit more about that process, of what Lake Region did to construct the passport block.
The first thing we did is we took the outcomes and distributed them to our Gen Ed faculty and asked them to please list any classes they had that they felt met all of the outcomes in an area. So they would have the teamwork ones, they would have the creative expression, whatever they might have, and then they would say, yes, this class, this class, this class, this class. So then we took the classes and the areas they thought they fit in, put them under the columns. I'm sorry, we had done on our own first classes we thought would, and then had faculty verify them. And it was amazing how many classes we were able to get under each block. We had some interesting discussions, and the only thing that saved us is knowing this is a work in progress, that we can get our block in now, but we might have to readjust. And so the one area we ran into was, well, you know, this class could fit here and this class could fit here, but we didn't want them, you know, to double dip, so it'd have to be choose 3 from here, choose 2 from here, that sort of a thing. And we're still working on it because we also have to hold true to our in-state agreement of transfer.
Mm-hmm.
That involves certain things. So we still have some things to work out to make sure that a student transferring can get not only the passport block stamp, but also within our state.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that helps. And, you know, of course, Tom Steen has been my hero for so long. I've admired his work in Gen Ed, and he was just awesome to work with because he really did what you were conveying. It's a matter of what we feel meets the requirements. You know, it's a matter of our integrity, what meets, nothing being dictated to us.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks, Teresa. And James, were you involved in the construction of Leeward's passport block at all? Is there anything you can say to that?
Only in the first the first areas, you know, the first phase,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that we had other faculty involved with the building of the blocks.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for this great presentation, and thanks for everybody who attended or who is listening on later. If you have any questions, feel free to forward those to me. I will be sending out an email after this after this webinar with a survey link, and you'll have my email address through that. And please fill out that survey. It's really important to us to get your feedback on how we can improve things in any future webinars. With that, thanks again for everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Kate.
Yep.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, James, it was great working with you again.
You too.